Recommend changing the relationship to our ego. So at a very young age, we began building our self-concept. Siblings, teachers, social media, music, friends, strangers, a lot of things go into building this self-concept before we even know it. At a very young age, some of us become obsessed with building this self-concept, whether we realize it or not. A lot of us, as we grow older, become to branch away from our self-concept, and at the same time, many of us do not. So, what is the ego? When most of us think about the ego, we think about an inflated sense of self-importance. Someone who is egotistical, closed-minded, someone who is very selfish and only self-concerned. However, this is a very minimalistic view. The ego is the voice that tells an individual how to respond or act based upon their self-concept. So it's composed of our thoughts, our judgments, our values, our beliefs, and most of all, our emotions. Common thoughts associated with the ego are, I'm good at math, I'm bad at math, I am a better soccer player than she is, I'm a worse soccer player, I'm a good person. In the Western society, many of us view this self-concept as a positive because we are very attached to it and we are afraid of letting it go. However, in the Buddhist philosophy, this self-concept is just an illusion. Buddhists believe that it's the root to all of our suffering in life. It's in charge of our emotions such as depression, fear, anxiety, stress, anger, etc. It may be difficult to understand when you've been living your whole life in the captivity of the ego. However, we need to examine the root of a problem from an honest, open-minded perspective. So I want everyone to close their eyes for a minute and think about something that really makes you unhappy. And don't worry, we're not going to share this out, but when you're done, you can open your eyes. So common answers are things like financial issues, struggling to find meaning in life, relationship problems, the list goes on. Even if it's not something that I've thought of in this list, Buddhist teachings believe that all suffering and unhappiness in our life is rooted deep within our ego. So, ego death is a concept mostly found in Buddhism, but is adapted as a foundation for many religions all throughout the world. Buddhist monks believe to reach this state of complete ego death through decades of meditation, where the sense of self evolves into a new state and reaches enlightenment. And in this state of enlightenment, it is theorized that there is no longer a separation between you and the world. You are one connected with everything, and you are a part of everything around you. The concept of I or you is obsolete and is no longer important. There is no more judgment or right or wrong, good or bad, and one does no longer resist pain or any form of suffering. And death is not a concern because you are no longer concerned with yourself. Simply put, you come to this realization that you are just a result of the world. In this state, the ego can no longer dictate our emotions. However, silencing the ego is very different and is most common in mindfulness meditation practices today. Instead of stripping away one's identity, which is an ego death, it focuses on cultivating growth of awareness and consciousness of you and others around you. So to quiet one's ego is to improve one's overall consciousness. Once the ego is quieted, one is more receptive to feedback, one is more interested in personal growth, one embraces experiences more, and takes more risks in life. Meditation is key to reaching this state, however, placing selflessness is key. Placing emphasis on selflessness is key. So let's take a look at what's going on in the brain during meditation. So the amygdala, which is in this photo here, is found in the temporal lobes of the brain. It's in charge of processing memory, decision-making, and it responds with emotions such as fear, anxiety, pleasure, and is associated with mood disorders such as depression, PTSD, phobias. The prefrontal cortex in the right photo is found in the cerebral cortex of the brain, and it's associated with higher order brain functions such as our concentration, our awareness, our consciousness, and is also part of our decision making. In an 8-week study done by Boston University and Harvard Med School students, brains were scanned before each mindfulness meditation class. And by the end of the 8-week course, researchers were shocked to find that the amygdala actually shrank in the test subjects. So everything is connected in the brain, and when the amygdala shrank, the prefrontal cortex thickens, ultimately raising one's awareness. The more and the longer one meditates, the more present and aware one can become. So through this, one can physically choose to change how different parts of the brain interact with each other and access a higher state of consciousness, maybe where the ego is no longer a dictator of our emotions. So, although mindfulness meditation has strong correlations to mental health, it has very physical effects on the body as well. In a study conducted by Joshua Grant, a postdoctor at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences in Germany, concluded that expert meditators, who they quantified as people who had 40,000 hours in meditation experience, claimed to experience significantly less pain compared to non-meditators. In the normal non-meditator's mind, the anterior single-gate cortex, which is right here, which is in charge of stimulating the unpleasantness of the pain, and the prefrontal cortex are usually connected, but in the minds of the meditators, they are completely separated. In this study, it stated that it seems Zen practitioners were able to remove or lessen the aversiveness of the stimulation and thus the stressing nature of it by altering the connectivity between two brain regions which are normally communicating with one another. They certainly don't seem to have blocked the experience, rather it seems they have refrained from engaging in thought processes that make it more painful. So, today, millions of people all around the world practice mindfulness meditation, and it can be a very beneficial tool. However, if teachings are not accurate, they can definitely contradict the practice. So in a paper published by University of Southampton, they discuss that the act of practicing or teaching any skill promotes this idea of ego inflation. And this idea was put to test by their researchers, and they studied 93 students for a duration of 15 weeks by doing a mindfulness meditation class. They recorded the self-enhancement of students by asking how they compared to the average meditation student. They tested narcissist tendencies by asking if they will be well known for the good deeds they have done in their life. And lastly, they tested self-esteem. They asked, at the moment, do you feel like you have high self-esteem? Studies concluded that students just after the class had significantly higher levels of high self-esteem compared to when they hadn't practiced meditation in the past 24 hours. Many teachers and practitioners of mindfulness meditation fail to teach placing emphasis on selflessness, which should be the goal of these practices. Those who choose to focus their attention on the self will have inflated their ego. Just because Buddhist religion believes in getting rid of this self-concept doesn't mean it's an essential part to live a happy and content life. Many live very fulfilling lives without having the ego consume their emotions. And personally, I believe there is strong connection to our ego, and it exists for a reason. Maybe that reason is to test us and to open our perspectives to become the best versions of ourselves. However, for some, I believe it's essential to change their relationship to it. Some can depend too heavily on it and ultimately become insecure and unhappy with who they are. Those who choose to lessen the attachment to their ego may achieve a clearer picture of their true selves and find a path a much happier, more conscious life. Or may achieve a clearer picture of themselves and find a path to a happier, more conscious life. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Soma. We're going to go into questions. So audience members, please feel free to ask questions, and then panelists as well.
When you're talking about the contradictions of meditation, are you saying what form of meditation should people be doing if they want to kill their ego?
So it's not really the form of meditation, it's just the way that it's taught.
Okay.
So a lot of times in these classes, a lot of people don't have a lot of experience and really know what they're teaching. And kind of the whole practice behind mindfulness meditation is to just try to place emphasis on selflessness and not getting wrapped around in your thoughts and who you are, and branching away from that and looking at everything as a whole. Yeah. That answers your question? Yes.
So you said that the ego kind of conjures up this negative connotation, and you touched upon it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about what why do you think the ego has existed and has it evolved in humans? Why do you think it's there? I mean, just tell me a little bit more about why you think the ego is present in us.
Personally, I believe that our ego was once an essential part of who we were evolving as humans. As when we were cavemen, our ego were really essential to hunt down animals and kill them and fight in order to maintain our survival. And I believe that now through evolution it's no longer an essential part to who we are. And maybe we should start to branch away from needing it in our lives.
And a follow-up to that, do you think that are humans the only ones that carry egos, or have you formed an opinion, do animals have egos, or is it just for kind of higher life form?
I think all living beings have egos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they're all, I mean, it depends on what you qualify as a living being, but personally I think that everything that is conscious of themselves and viewing the world as they are one and they are not with the world has an ego. And if an animal I don't know, a dolphin recognizes that it's one within a herd of other animals, it's still recognizing that it's oneself and it's different than.
So it's the self-concept, you have to recognize that you are this thing in the world.
One thing in the world, yes.
Okay.
Goldfish wouldn't qualify. Or, may. I don't know.
So you talked about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, and how after meditation researchers have discovered that the amygdala it physically shrank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's
physically shrank in
interesting.
size.
So my question is, does that mean that the ego is directly tied to the amygdala?
Well, how I think of it is the ego isn't tied to a part of the brain, it just exists, and because the amygdala shrinks and the prefrontal cortex grows, you're just basically growing your consciousness, and therefore, like, your ego is, like, eliminating with that, or, like...
But what's the connection between the amygdala and the ego?
Just look back at that slide. It's just, like, the ego is more connected to the prefrontal cortex and, like, the consciousness of one.
Okay, my
Does that make
understanding, yeah, I guess I
Yeah.
thought what you were going for was like, since the amygdala is like the planning center and whatnot, that like the more it shrank, then the
Yeah.
less concerned about like,
No, because the amygdala is like the lizard brain.
It's-
yeah,
That's like the raw, like fight or flight.
yeah, and like
amygdala,
if it
right?
shrinks, then you're like less concerned with
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Frontal
primal-
cortex is
in
planning.
meditation, yeah,
Oh, okay.
it begins to shrink through that, and then
So what are
One's
the
consciousness
effects
is-
on the people of it shrinking? Like what does that do?
well, I mean, other than like one being more conscious, like because when the amygdala shrinks, the prefrontal cortex ultimately thickens,
Uh-huh.
and then one is like able to be more conscious and like more aware.
The amygdala, sorry. The amygdala is tied to like depression and PTSD.
Yeah.
Okay. So like when people meditate and the amygdala shrank, did they also see lessening in like mental illness issues?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, there's more in my paper about the study specifically, but basically, yeah, it's tied to like depression, PTSD, like a lot of mood disorders. So when that shrinks, so does those disorders, and yeah.
I like how you put us through an exercise where we had to close our eyes, and I noticed that just the quietness and the stillness was just it was impressive. I liked how you used that into your presentation.
Is this something you practice? And if so, like what changes have you seen in yourself?
Yeah, so my senior project is going to be to practice meditation. Yeah, and I honestly, like, I kind of refrained from, like, doing meditation just so I didn't really have, like, a strong bias in my paper, because I know, like, I would get really attached to it and, like, want to explain it from my point of view, but I honestly haven't really experienced kind of anything.
What led to your interest? I mean, that's an interesting take on this topic,
Yeah.
right? Like, what has led you to this place?
You know, I kind of just, like, in the car, I was, like, talking with my brother one day, and, like, it kind of, like, came from, I was, like, doing this climb with my brother, and I was getting so attached to, like, I was so upset because I couldn't do this climb, and it was so attached to my self-concept, and it was really, really frustrating to me, and, like, for days, I would just be, like, super upset and, like, really obsessed with this climb, and I'm like, okay, well, like, this is really, really, really bad. Like, it's taking a whole toll on my emotions, and, like, I need to think about this from a different perspective, and not just in climbing, I started thinking about it, like, in everything that I do. Like, how my self-concept is influencing all of my thoughts daily, and how, like, it's so harmful. And just was like, oh, it doesn't just apply to, like, my climbing, but, like, with everything that I do in life.
So you found that this concept for you has been personally super useful,
Yes.
it sounds like.
Yes.
I may have missed this, but is like the purpose of meditation to improve self-concept or destroy it?
It's not to destroy it, but I mean, when you're in ego death, you're getting rid of this self-concept. So you're completely eliminating your sense of self, and you're stripping away your identity. But there's, like, a whole spectrum there. So, like, and, like, when you're silencing your ego, or, like, you're still, like, not stripping away your self-concept, but you're, like, branching away from, like, those harmful cycles that, like, this is the only thing I care about, is, like, myself. You're just more conscious and more aware in your life, and you're able to, like, not have, like, your ego dictate everything that you do. You're able to, like, understand that and branch away from it. So.
Are there other ways to limit or silence this process, this egoic process, outside
Definitely.
of meditation or mindfulness? I mean, can you do it through medicine or drugs?
Yeah, so, like, certainly, like, through psychedelics, I like researched this a little bit in my paper, but like you can certainly reach ego death or the state of enlightenment through certain doses of psychedelics, and but it's not a long-lasting effect. Once the high wears off, you are back in your normal state. Like, that doesn't mean to say that you can't have experiences that make you, like, I don't know, experience a whole different part of life and, like, who you are, and you can certainly have those experiences, but it's not a long-lasting effect like meditation, where once you're reaching the state of enlightenment and you've been practicing meditation over and over again, you start to become, like, physically changed forever.
The psychedelics are a quick fix. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not meant to have an everlasting.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you, Soma.
Yeah.
We're going to send you outside for just a moment. I'll call you back in.